Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Jen Kelchner, founder of Leader 21, and it is very early on Monday morning, April 6th. My eyeballs are still getting used to it being Monday morning already, despite the wonky sense of time that we're all feeling. But I really felt like I had zero energy to talk about this last night when it happened in the moment, so I wanted to make sure I did it first thing this morning before I became interrupted with something else. Having another one of these, I guess what I'm going to start coining these mindset ninja moments. But it actually came from a couple of things. It came from just kind of low key watching what was going on. I don't engage in news media, barely engage in social media anymore. So for me, it's much healthier to stay out of chaos and only only hop in on a couple of quick trusted sources just to get kind of general touch points and headlines and things like that. And then I'll go deeper if need be. But for the most part, 98% of the time, I avoid anything media related from multiple sources. Just I avoid it. So, but it was part of that, part of seeing how this situation is unfolding at global scale. I had a couple of conversations over the weekend with people that are in different countries and kind of understanding their perspective, how all of this is affecting them, not just, kind of the government aspects, the business as usual aspects, like looking at that outside of how the illness itself is affecting where they were in their country. And it gave rise to some pretty deep conversations. And then the second part was viewing some quick threads so yes, I avoid the social media, but then when I do get in to check on things, I typically don't allow myself to start reading comments and kind of going down rabbit holes. Kind of do a quick skim. If it's a title or a topic that seems pretty important, I'll kind of stick with it for a minute and just kind of scan through. But I don't engage. And I do that because I don't feel like that's my purpose for being there. And I recognize it's okay for that's where somebody else is. It's just not where I'm at right now. I don't have energy to give to it. So, but what brought that on was looking at this total disparity in how we're viewing business, education as usual. We're viewing the economic impacts. We're viewing access to much needed things. Use that word for right now. Very, very high level things. And the other part came out of seeing people's responses. Okay, so where it was is realizing that when you see someone else's posts, and by the way, this is just not a now in the middle of a crisis thing. This is all the time. I've been teaching this for a long time with my coaching and in other leadership development stuff that I do. But I think people are probably going to be a lot more apt to listen now because of the crisis that we're in. But when you read something that someone posts, or if you're in a one-to-one situation with them and they make the statement to you, whatever that engagement looks like, the person has said a thing. And once they've said the thing, you then have an opportunity to respond. And this is where most people are getting it wrong. Or let's rephrase that. What they don't understand is what their response is saying about them. Because your response to someone else is never about that person or what they said. Very, very rarely about that. It's one thing if you're having this discourse about perspectives and opinions, but if your reaction, if your response is one that is saying, that's not fair, you wouldn't understand, okay, so it comes from this attack place or this aggression that is just saying, like, who do you think you are? You couldn't possibly understand what's going on in my world. So, step off. That whole little thing, that dynamic of this aggressive, forceful, on the defense attack type of response that you have. When you have that, it's always saying something more about you than it ever is about the individual or the situation you're responding to. So we have to take a step back. If we have one of those internal moments, it's just like, and you just want to come on the attack, you need to pull back and go, okay, but why do I feel that way? Why do I feel that way? And it doesn't have to like that little internal assessment to kind of understand, why am I feeling angry about this? Why do I feel blank about this? It doesn't mean that there aren't aspects that are totally validated for having a response. There are so many injustices that have gone on for eons in this planet. So there may be an actual injustice taking place that is giving rise to anger. Very, very true. It's not invalidating how you feel for me to say this or for you to process it this way. It's just kind of, you need to take a step back and do an internal assessment, because sometimes, while it's being brought on by an injustice, an unfairness, if you will, there's still a reason that we have this type of aggressive behavior back versus a more thoughtful way of the interaction, right? Like coming from a place of empathy and compassion. So a lot of it is an emotional intelligence response, and knowing how to balance that before engaging back and creating a positive space for change to happen, for that injustice to be rectified, for communication to be open. And it's even when we look at all of the I'm just going to go with the word injustice now. um, I think it's as simple as we see people, some of the comments that riled me up this weekend was like, gosh, why can't people get it? They see someone that is a celebrity or someone with a lot of wealth talking about their experience being self-quarantined and what it's like for them. And the other person responds negatively, because how could you understand? You have all the money in the world and I can't pay my bills and na. Yeah, but that person that you're responding to is having their experience that they have on their journey, right? For you, you're having your experience that you're having along your journey. It's not that person's fault, if you will. You cannot blame them because their career has led them a particular direction, and yours, unfortunately, the environment you're living in has crippled you. And there's so many layers to that. Okay, so I'm being very, very, very ambiguous about this. I get it. But having that response for a moment to realize, I guess the point of all of this is to, one, think about your reactions, two, understand why it's giving rise to that set of emotions so that you can actually navigate and deal with the change that needs to happen. And the third part is, and the main point is, when are we going to stop and make a collective decision that money and that status and that fill in the blank is not the value of a human life? It's not the value of contribution that a person makes. It does not matter, because each person assesses what that value from a monetary standpoint should be. And so you can keep having these interactions and say, well, person A works this many hours. They are so hard. They are so dedicated. They deserve to get X, Y, and Z amount of money and this level of status and this level of things. Well, sure, great, good for them. But that shouldn't negate someone else that's also putting in 70 or 80 hours a week and giving it their all where they are. Because then we're starting to have these little flow charts and these little, levers of what's important and what's not important. So we say the individual that puts in the effort of 70 hours a week, working 3 jobs to feed their family at what we would consider as professionals, an unprofessional job, right? Well, how does that in any way, shape, or form take away from a measure of effort that somebody else put in at 70 hours a week, maybe at one job, right? Like, we've got to start getting away from these labels that we assign. And I've said it for years, labels are for things, not for people. So find a descriptor, a compassionate description for the individual that you're talking about, and start becoming more of an objective observer and start looking at the value. What do we want when we come out of this crisis? What do we as business leaders, what do we as government leaders, what do we as citizens, what do we as humans in this world want to see change? And if you don't want to go back to this system that we've all been in, that has not been held accountable, that has not valued the contribution, that has not valued a human or a citizen contribution appropriately, If you want to see a different world and we want to start valuing humans in a very appropriate way, then start focusing on that and stop looking backwards at what hasn't been right and what hasn't been fair and what hasn't been justified in treating people what should never have been to start with, but we know that it's centuries deep and beyond. I get it. I'm not taking it away, and I'm not saying don't turn a blind eye to it and not look for a way for that to be repaired. But I think it's exceptionally important in this moment right now moving forward to recognize that when we start to come out of this crisis at global scale, we have an opportunity as humans to make a choice about what we want it to look like. Nothing is ever going back to the way it was. So what do we want it to look like moving forward? And if we think about that honestly and fairly and justly and from a more equitable state where everybody's on an even playing field because they are a human, then we can go from there and repairing and reframing and rebuilding a much better world for everyone. Is it going to take time? Sure. Is it a process? Absolutely. Does it require leadership changes and leadership mindset changes? Absolutely. Does it require some of us to give a little and for somebody else to have a little bit more? Yeah. But if we stop focusing on the fact that it's some pretend paper money somewhere that is what's driving our value, and actually focusing on contribution value in a much different way, I think we can get there. In fact, I don't just think, I know, I fully believe that we can get there with enough people thinking the right way and forcing it. But it all starts here. It all starts right here in this place with you, with me, each of us as an individual, collectively wanting to give birth to a better world. And not worrying about what hasn't worked or who has been in control or who is in this moment in control or what the system did look like or what the system did or didn't do. Full stop. We're never going back to that. And if you think we are, you're unfortunately going to end up getting left behind, because there is absolutely no way to ever go back to what was before this event. And anything going forward has got to be absolutely 100% brand new. So even if it's coming out in phases over a period of time to get there, we can never go back to the way it was. It's way too broken. It does not work. So as a leader, as a human, as a citizen, start to think about what that would look like, not with anger in your heart, not with injustice in your heart, but from a place that just says, in a perfect, ideal world, I think if we valued humans' contribution, human life, if we valued, what a citizen interaction looks like and a citizen life looks like, and what does that look like in leadership, and what does that look like in business, what does that look like in our government, what does that look like, and just keep filling in the blank, visualize it, think about what it feels like to you, and then let's all get on that board. Every single person needs to be dreaming right now about what that could look like, so that as we start to come out of this crisis, whenever that day arrives, that we are actually building something that is a much more equitable, beautiful, collaborative, inclusive, open world. Thanks for tuning into my rant.